Luan Juzi glanced at Mr. Liu, who was sitting on the other side of the emperor. The old man immediately stood up and started to channel the mystical yin and yang power of the Liu clan to conceal the area they were in. This made it even harder for others to use the power of their mind or distance observation mystical abilities to detect what was happening here. Only then did Luan Juzi speculate. It's extremely likely that this calamity was caused by the schemes of the other schools of thought. At the very least, they played a part in helping it along. Perhaps even Aoyang's coincidental arrival was the result of someone secretly delivering a message to him. After all, to coincidentally charge into the Great Li Empire not long after Qi Jingchun passed away? There are definitely people in the 100 schools of thought who don't want to see my branch of Mahists and the school of naturalists represented by the Liu clan to help the Great Li Empire smoothly conquer the entire eastern treasured vile continent. The emperor unclenched his fists and rubbed his cheeks. His expression was ice-cold as he chuckled coldly and said, "Heh! An atmosphere of war and a state of impending chaos that hasn't been seen for 1,000 years. Since things have already come to this, it's even more important that we don't lose heart," Luan Juzi warned quietly. The emperor smiled and shook his head, replying, "No, I definitely won't. So be it if it's 10 years, and so be it if it's 15 years. This is enough time to do many things." Thinking back to the previous emperors of the Great Li Empire, just how much humiliation and disdain have we suffered? My internal wounds are nothing compared to this. His speech was calm and casual, yet the man forcefully swallowed a mouthful of blood that had rushed to his throat. He lowered his head and used his fingers to massage his neck. There was ferocity and remorse on his face, though the expression of remorse quickly vanished to leave only ferocity. In the end, all that remained was an expression of resignation. As it turned out, that man had unleashed a supreme secret technique to secretly sever the emperor's heart meridian before ascending above the sky. This had comprehensively obliterated the emperor's path to immortality. Once a hidden 10th-tier cultivator brimming with vitality, the emperor's life force was now so fragile that it was shocking. Not only this, the 6 flying swords of the White Jade capital that hadn't been destroyed had all vanished into thin air as well. To put it simply, all that was left of the boundlessly powerful White Jade capital was an empty shell. It was nothing more than an imposing tower used to frighten others. To kill a cultivator at the upper 5 tiers? This was nothing but a foolish dream. In contrast to his panic and rage just then, Song Jisun had already regained his composure as he walked up to the emperor and the 2 old men. However, he still insisted on getting to the bottom of things as he asked, "Luan Juzi, Mr. Liu, can you tell me what in the world is going on? Why can't I sense any of the flying swords?" The White Jade capital had 12 floors, and corresponding to this 12 flying swords. Incense offering, pillar rock, mountain suppressing, mountain and sea, peach twig, thundering sky, purple lightning, scripture, Sanskrit chant, majestic aura, elaborate makeup, cloud pattern. The Great Li Empire had expended half of the nation's wealth to forge these 12 flying swords. Thus, they could all be regarded as genuine treasures of the empire. Including incense offering, 6 of the flying swords had already been shattered along with the godly bodies of the 6 formal gods. However, the remaining 6 formal gods had stepped aside and not challenged Aoyang at all. Thus, even if the flying swords didn't return to the White Jade capital, Song Jisun should have at least been able to sense their presence. Yet, like kites that had been cut free, the young prince had completely lost his connection to these flying swords. Luan Juzi glanced back at the empty White Jade capital. He then retracted his gaze and sighed heavily, revealing, "The 6 remaining flying swords have already been snatched away by that person. Even though he didn't take them beyond the sky with him, he's most likely tossed them in some place that no one knows about. In any case, it will be impossible for us to find them anytime soon. Even if we do manage to find them, it's hard to say whether we'll be able to get them back and use them." Song Jisun was only a young boy after all. In just a night's time, he had suddenly transformed from an illegitimate son in an impoverished alley into a prince in one of Eastern treasured vile continent's most powerful empires. After arriving in the capital with a muddled mind, he had then been mysteriously taken to this tower. After overcoming numerous challenges and facing many struggles, he had finally managed to win the recognition of the 12 flying swords. At that moment, he had felt like he could finally stand up straight and hold his head up high when he talked to that bastard man. In the end, however, had all of his efforts been for nothing? After hearing Wan Juzi's reply, tears immediately started to trickle down Song Jisen's face. He bit his lips, and there were still streaks of blood on his face that he was yet to clean off. Wan Juzi didn't know how to encourage or console the young boy. In fact, even this old man who had experienced a bumpy life full of challenges was feeling shock and disbelief. Along with wanderers, Mahas still abided by the ancestral teachings of their first sage. Among these teachings was the notion that one should support the weak and aid weak nations in resisting humiliation and bullying from more powerful nations. However, Luan Chongye had come to his own conclusion after reading the history books of several empires over several generations and traversing the lands of countless nations. What he saw and what he heard had led him to conclude this, blindly supporting the weak and helping them patch things up here and there would only end in futility. Chaos would ensue for hundreds of years, and powerful generals would rise and fall one after another. In comparison to having a powerful empire uniting the land, attempting to fuel the resistance of weaker nations against a dominant empire would only lead to far more casualties. Thus, Luan Chongye needed to choose a suitable empire and a suitable ruler to achieve his ambition. In the end, he had chosen Song Zhengchun, the emperor of the Great Li Empire. Moreover, he hadn't been disappointed. Even after being attacked by Aoyang and suffering a severe setback to the monumental rise of the empire, Luan Chongye still didn't feel like his decision was incorrect. His only downfall was the fact that the plans of humans could never rival the plans of the heavens. Even Luan Chongye had to admit inferiority when it came to clashing with those mighty beings behind the scenes. However, he had still chosen to gamble. He had chosen to gamble everything for a chance to win unstoppable momentum to conquer the lands. The emperor smiled and said, "Can you two check on the White Jade capital to see if there's any issue with it? If that person's left any hidden traps, then I genuinely might as well smash my head against a wall and kill myself. While you two are busy with that, I'll also have an opportunity to have a private chat with Song Mu. However, let me say this first. You two have to promise me that you won't eavesdrop. The two of us are going to discuss some private family matters, so please excuse us." The two old men hurriedly stood up. One of them smiled and said he wouldn't eavesdrop, and one of them said he wouldn't dare to eavesdrop. The emperor looked up at the stubborn expression of the young boy. He patted the spot next to him on the step, and he imperceptibly crushed the jade pendant that was hanging by his waist. His voice was solemn as he said, "Here, sit down. From now on, I'm your father, Song Zhengchun, and you're my son, Song Mu. It's probably better to call you Song Jisen. The passing down of flames, and the gathering of these flames one. This is a very good omen." Song Yuzhang chooses tacky names for people, but it has to be said that he puts quite some thought into them. Song Jisen obediently sat next to the man. "I have to say, the fortune of Great Sui Nation's Gao clan is truly remarkable," the emperor said with emotion. "Also, your words truly did jinx the situation." Song Jisen felt slightly uneasy as he sat alone with his father. Even though he wasn't afraid of this man on the surface, through the attitudes of his uncle Song Chongjing, his maidservant Ji Gui, and the two old men, he had indeed sensed the powerful control this man had over the Great Li Empire. The emperor appeared magnanimous and relaxed, yet he was actually filled with a sense of near-arrogant confidence on the inside. This was similar to that saber-wielding man's attitude toward Eastern treasured vile continent and the world that this continent existed in. The emperor smiled and continued, "Since the 6 flying swords from the White Jade capital have failed to return, it will suffice to say that they've been lost. Then so be it. The sky won't collapse because of this." Song Jisen erupted in fury, shouting, "Then so be it. How can you dismiss it so casually? Luan Juzi and Mr. Lu told me before. The existence of these 12 flying swords signifies the direction that the Great Li Empire can take the entire continent in. The importance of them." The young boy didn't dare to continue. Moreover, he quickly came to his senses and recalled the fact that the creator of the White Jade capital and the flying swords wasn't him, but instead this resigned man beside him. The emperor gazed at the roof ridge of a distant imperial hall where a row of mythical beasts sat. His voice was soft as he said, "To the emperor of a nation, immense difficulties aren't something to be afraid of. As long as one can overcome these difficulties, this signifies the growth and strengthening of one's empire. If one can't overcome these challenges, however, This signifies one's lack of ability to rule over their nation. This unexpected obstacle that suddenly crashed down before us, neither I nor the Great Li Empire were able to overcome it with just a small scare. This is very unfortunate. However, I don't feel any regret. Honestly, I'm not lying to you. Song Jisun couldn't understand this no matter what, so he asked, why? The emperor's gaze became focused and intense, and there was no longer a shred of resignation or despondence to be found. He pointed at the roof ridge of the imperial hall and replied, because this increasingly proves the strategy that I laid out for the Great Li Empire to be correct. Cultivators, regardless of whether they're qi refiners or Dao cultivators, and regardless of whether they're good or bad, should all be locked up in a cage. The Great Li Empire won't stop them from becoming gods and immortals and seeking immortality. In fact, the Empire is even willing to help them achieve their ambition, and glad to see them succeed. However, an empire must have a bottom line. At the very least, it needs to have a set of rules and regulations which these transcendent individuals must obey. They shouldn't be allowed to act as they please, wantonly moving mountains and rivers or picking fights with others simply because they want to. And in the end, the largest number of casualties is often suffered by those defenseless commoners of the empires. No, I want the citizens of my empire to respect and honor these transcendent beings not simply out of fear and trepidation. The future I desire is one where the Great Li Empire will have the confidence and power to seek justice for innocent commoners, even those on the lowest rung of society, and those viewed as ants by the transcendent beings, if they're wantonly killed due to a battle between the transcendent beings. Song Jisun was absolutely stunned. His mouth hung open, yet he couldn't utter a single word. The emperor raised 2 fingers, leaving only a tiny gap between them, and he chuckled. The justice that the Great Li Empire is able to give its people now is extremely small, only this small. Compared to the other nations in Eastern Treasured Vile Continent that slave away for the cultivators and immortals, however, the gulf between us is truly like the gulf between heaven and earth. He casually swung his wrist before clenching his hand into a fist and holding it up to the roof ridge in the distance as if making a show of force against someone. I sincerely hope that the Great Li Empire will be able to give its people this much justice in the future. Or perhaps even more. Song Jisun had already become numb with astonishment. For the first time, he felt like the man beside him was truly someone with flesh and blood. The emperor was no longer as cold and rigid as the dragon throne that he sat on and the dragon robe that he wore. The emperor turned around and asked, "Do you know which words from Aoyang angered me the most?" Song Jisun mustered his courage and replied, "When he told you to kowtow and apologize?" The emperor roared with laughter. He shook his head and explained, "As the ruler of this empire, I can die standing up, but I definitely can't live kneeling down. If I lack such resolve, how can the Great Li Empire march south to conquer the entire Eastern Treasured Vile Continent? If a person belittles themselves, then the heavens will naturally belittle them as well. If a person strives for self-improvement, however, then even the heavens will bestow them with help. It's best that you remember this." And the disparaging comments from the immortals that Eastern Treasured Vile Continent is the smallest continent in the world. However, do you genuinely know just how large this continent is? You can pick any history book in the world to read. Who has ever become the ruler of an entire continent? Song Jisun had a look of determination as he nodded and repeated, "If a person strives for self-improvement, then even the heavens will bestow them with help. I'll remember this." There was an expression of melancholy on the emperor's face as he continued, "What truly angered me was his claim that there are no capable fighters in the Great Li Empire. Not a single one. Step by step, I secretly advanced to the 10th tier of Qi refinement. This can already be regarded as amazing in Eastern Treasured Vile Continent. As a 10th tier martial artist, your uncle Song Chongjing is even more powerful and impressive. Yet what was the outcome? In his eyes, both of us were still regarded as not strong enough to fight with. However, fortune often accompanies calamity. This is the true reason why I was able to survive. One of the reasons. If I were at the 12th tier, and if he had felt like I was a capable opponent, perhaps he would have ended my life with a single slash." The emperor suddenly started to laugh heartily for some unknown reason. However, it felt like he was an aging hero who had already passed his prime. "A single slash?" Song Jisun asked, giving the man a painful reminder again. The emperor nodded and replied, I can guarantee that a single slash would have been enough. He was a swordsman at the pinnacle of the 13th tier, a swordsman. That's why he can act so unreasonably. There was indecision on Song Jisun's face, and he opened his mouth to speak several times before eventually swallowing his words again. It was as if there were a nagging question on his mind that wasn't exactly easy to ask. The man leaned back and placed his hands on the floor, with his posture appearing carefree as he gazed up at the sky. Do you want to ask why he didn't kill us all before ascending to that place that no one knows about? Song Jisun roughly wiped his cheeks with the back of his hand before nodding in reply. Before telling you the answer, let me tell you this unfortunate news first. It's said that powerful individuals who have advanced to the 13th tier are capable of returning to the world. They can return to our mortal realm again. Even though this hasn't happened many times, there have been precedents after all. However, for one reason or another, the 100 schools of thought and the powerful clans have all decided to keep this a secret. Song Jisun was quick-witted, and a look of shock immediately spread across his face. The chosen path before the Great Li Empire is still very long, the man sighed. This is a long road that we need to traverse with heavy responsibilities on our shoulders. But don't lose heart. In the end, he pointed at some place in the palatial complex and chuckled. There's a young boy almost completely raised by his mother here, and when he was young, he refused to go to Mountain Cliff Academy no matter what. I couldn't be bothered dealing with this and trying to change his mind. This child is very interesting, and if a dog on the streets shows any intention of wanting to bite him, he'll definitely kill it to make dog stew regardless of whether the dog truly wounded him or not. Perhaps he'll even find the family and relatives of the dog and kill them all as well. Only then will he feel satisfied. So what about you, Song Jisun? I'll do the same. Song Jisun replied without hesitation. The man nodded and said, I was also like this when I was young. However, my temperament changed slightly after I ascended the throne. This was because I suddenly felt a little bored one day. The man turned around and said with a smile, however, it's good for one to have such temperament when they're young, forging ahead with determination and displaying their talent and vigor to the fullest extent. If others show respect, then tenfold the respect will be returned. If others offer humiliation, then humiliation they shall be given for life. This is what a man should be like. And I thought you would be very disappointed, Song Jisun said softly. The man patted his shoulder and replied, No, I'm not disappointed. If you didn't learn any true abilities at your young age, and instead learned how to read my expressions and use those techniques that the imperial officials used to speculate my thoughts, the so-called dragon-slaying techniques, then I would have been truly disappointed. Song Jisun leaned forward and placed his hands on his knees. Resting his chin on the backs of his hand, he said, But I know someone who might choose to act differently. The emperor sat up straight and placed his hand on the young boy's head. Believe my observations. That child holds grudges better than anyone else. It's just that he's endured far too much hardship ever since a young age. So he's already learned how to endure these situations and restrain himself. Becoming enemies with someone like this truly spells serious trouble. That's why I turned a blind eye to Green Ripple Pavilion's attempt at his life. However, you can relax. He's never treated you as an enemy, and this is especially the case after you performed those 2 menial actions on a whim. Song Jisun's face flushed beet red. However, it's hard to say what will happen when you one day become the emperor of the Great Li Empire, the man added. Since that person's ascended and won't return to the mortal world anytime soon, let's seize the opportunity to eliminate that what if in a single breath. However, Song Jisun felt a little annoyed with himself immediately after saying this. He rejected his own suggestion and muttered, No, what if that person returns? Then the Great Li Empire will truly be destroyed. The man was amused and he asked with a pleased smile, Do you feel like this is an unsolvable problem? Don't worry, that's because your position isn't high enough yet. Song Jisun felt a little deflated, and he could only console himself by thinking, if a person strives for self-improvement, then even the heavens will bestow them with help. Everyone needs 1 or 2 frenemies in their life. Only then will things become interesting. I had one when I was young, just like you do too, the man chuckled. There was a brief period of silence before Song Jisun reminded the man, You still haven't answered the question yet. Take your time and think about it yourself. My temper isn't good enough that I'll rub salt into my own wounds after being beaten half dead. Oh, that's right. There are only benefits and no drawbacks to becoming the owner of the White Jade Capital. I lied to your mother regarding this matter. However, I'm sure you know that I'm not lying to you after you lost control of the flying swords. As for the significance behind this, you need to contemplate it yourself. It's always good to give things a bit more thought. After revealing this secret, the man stood up slightly and was just about to leave. However, he suddenly sat back down and grabbed the young boy's palm, chuckling. Let me read your palm for you. I have some elementary understanding of this art, but I've never had the opportunity to test it on anyone before. So let me test it out on you today. Song Jisun was slightly befuddled as he offered his palm to the man. As he observed the ridges on the young boy's palm, the man said casually, You can continue to maintain a close relationship with your uncle, Song Chongjing, 10 or 15 years into the future. However, you definitely can't grow reliant on him. As for canvassing him and getting this martial arts prodigy to be sincerely convinced by you, a junior, you can forget about this. My younger brother can't be bothered to even conceal his wild ambitions. Even as his older brother who's always been slightly more capable than him, I've still never dared to show any signs of wanting to tame this ferocious beast. Before you truly mature and grow powerful, you can only think about seeking revenge against those you resent in your mind, regardless of who they are. However, you definitely shouldn't act on these thoughts recklessly. Of course, you shouldn't harbor any ill will towards your uncle simply because of the few words I've said today. He's a genuinely outstanding talent. Otherwise, he wouldn't have uttered the sincere words. It can't be the case that heroes only exist in my greatly empire. So, perhaps he'll acknowledge you in the future as long as you become more capable than him in some area. After a short moment, the emperor smiled and left. Song Jisun clenched his fists and continued to rest his head on his knees. The emperor had spoken some vaguely understandable words. During this time, however, he had also imperceptibly drawn 4 characters on the young boy's palm. Lifespan 3. Be careful. Song Jisun suddenly looked up at the figure who was striding away and shouted, Father! The man turned around, smiling as he looked at Song Jisun. His expression appeared nothing like that of an emperor as he gazed at the young boy. Just like that. This was a man whose true ambition was to speak the rules of the mortal world to all the transcendent deities and immortals. At this moment, it seemed like all of his life's efforts had been washed away by a rushing stream silently, and without any trace left. Song Jisun stood up, with tears brimming in his eyes. He was biting his lips so hard that a wisp of blood was already flowing. He was just about to open his mouth to say something else. However, the man had already turned back around, his voice sincere as he said, A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. Remember to eat your meals on time in the future. An old and travel-worn scholar exited Go Table Mountain and finally arrived at the foot of the mountain. After adjusting the luggage on his back, he placed his hands on his waist and moaned, Oh, my old waist and old bones. Such torture, such painful torture. Luan Juzi and Mr. Liu returned inside White Jade Capital together. They directly walked up to the 12th floor, where there were only 2 straw-woven cushions on the floor. These weren't incredible artifacts that could aid qi refiners in cultivation, and they were instead ordinary items that even commoners could afford. After sitting down opposite each other, Mr. Liu smiled and asked, When did you consult Qi Jingchun about building White Jade Capital? Luan Juzi shook his head with a smile, replying, Never. However, if I didn't say this, heaven knows what the eccentric Aoyang would have done. Perhaps he would have hacked us to death at the first disagreement. Mr. Liu faltered and asked in puzzlement, Surely not, right? Luan Juzi laughed heartily and said, Of course I'm kidding. Aoyang most likely isn't this kind of person. However, what I told him afterward was indeed the truth. Qi Jingchun did indeed sacrifice most of his time and effort for the Greatly Empire. Moreover, he had high hopes for the future of the Greatly Empire and Eastern Treasured Vile Continent. I'm sure that Aoyang understands this in his mind. Otherwise, Qi Jingchun wouldn't have founded Mountain Cliff Academy here, nor would he have offered lessons to everyone in the continent while residing in the Greatly Empire. Most of the people who graduated from Mountain Cliff Academy have already died of old age, though some of them are still alive. In any case, their acts of teaching and answering questions for the future generation of scholars can be viewed as an act of keeping Qi Jingquan's hopes and dreams alive. Luan Changya paused for a brief moment before asking, "Do you really think that these scholars don't feel any grievances regarding Qi Jingquan's death?" Mr. Lu remained silent as he pondered this. In the end, he slowly replied, "Due to the situation at that time, the Great Li Empire had no option but to choose the lesser of the two evils." Luan Juzi chuckled in reply, only touching the surface of the matter before drawing back. He immediately changed topics, saying, "In my opinion, today's commotion that has left us deeply wounded isn't as a result of the Great Li Empire attempting to flex its muscles and hunt that man. With Aoyang's cultivation base and the temperament that he displayed while traveling the continents back then, he isn't someone who would care about such trivial matters. I'm not entirely sure what's going through Aoyang's mind," Mr. Lu sighed. "However, let me voice the opinion that you kept buried in your mind just then. At the end of the day, the knot in that man's heart is still related to Qi Jingquan. When facing pressure from all sides back then, the Great Li Empire didn't choose to step forward to support Qi Jingquan. Moreover, the Great Li Empire immediately shut down Mountain Cliff Academy once Qi Jingquan left. The empire abandoned him far too quickly. In fact, one can even suspect the empire of profiting from his misfortune. However, both you and I understand that this was genuinely the wisest move that the emperor could have made. In any case, I'm sure that most ordinary emperors and rulers wouldn't even feel an inkling of guilt when making such decisions. In their minds, wouldn't such decisions be natural and perfectly justified? Anyway, if we look at things from Aoyang's perspective, would our involvement in the Great Li Empire's act of actively challenging him appear like a cultivator at the lower 5 realms flaunting their strength before him?" Luan Juzi asked. Not only that, but the cultivator was even puffing their chest in confidence, certain that they would win. Mr. Lu adjusted his sleeves and shifted his sitting position a little. There was a bitter smile on his face as he remarked, "Now that you say this, why do I feel like a bit of a clown?" Luan Juzi laughed and said, "If one day there were people like us, people who can be considered relatively esteemed, chatting about our deeds and marveling at our accomplishments, just how great would that be? Perhaps we would have had a glimmer of hope if we managed to successfully build the 13th floor of White Jade Capital," Mr. Lu sighed. "Now, however, it's far more difficult." Luan Juzi also sighed in emotion, saying, "I wonder which child from that group from the Great Li Empire will achieve the most surprising success in the future." "I wager Songmu," Mr. Lu replied with a smile. "How about you?" Luan Juzi smiled with squinted eyes and replied half seriously, "I wager that young girl, Wang Zhu. What do you say?" The old man from the Lu clan of the School of Naturalists shook his head and chuckled. "A lone branch can offer brilliant flowers and appear superior to others. However, for it to become a forest will be difficult." Luan Juzi also shook his head, not offering a comment on this. He suddenly recalled something and he asked, "Didn't Qi Jingquan also accept some other disciples while he was still in Zhuhou's small world? For example, Zhao Yao? Apart from him, I seem to remember that the School of Military Thought and the Taoist sect also fought over a child with the surname Ma." "Let's wait and see," Mr. Lu replied. "And let's hope that us two old geezers can live to see the conclusion of these tumultuous times." The maidservant Ji Gui had remained on the 10th floor of White Jade Capital the entire time. She hadn't gone elsewhere. While the others were distracted, she had climbed onto the windowsill and curled up her body, leaning sideways as she turned to look toward the south. She would glance at the sky, then glance at the south, and then repeat this again and again. She didn't appear bored in the least. For some reason, you always like to expound your ideas and reasoning to ants. In fact, you like to promote your grand principles even when it comes to me. Your life is more boring than anyone's, and your death will also be more miserable than anyone's. This is quite different from that person who you're seemingly very well acquainted with. He pays little heed to any of us, and he lives his life as carefree as could be. However, why do I still feel like you're a little better than him? Anyhow, regardless of who's better, this is simply something that I need to keep in mind. When it comes to interacting with people and dealing with matters though, I feel like one should be more like that strange person." In the end, the young girl squinted her golden eyes with twin pupils and chuckled. I just remembered that I'm not actually a person, am I?" She sat there in a daze. After a long while, she lifted a finger and ran it across her cheeks. Atop the city wall of the capital, two former allies stood face to face surrounded by a tense atmosphere. The woman wearing a palace dress shrieked, "Cui Chan, you recognized that person from the beginning, didn't you? So, in order to curry favor with him, you purposely opened the city gates and allowed him to charge to White Jade capital. Your actions are punishable by death. Even executing you one time isn't enough. Do you think you'll be any better off once I'm punished and demoted? Is your brain malfunctioning or something?" The old Cui Chan, who appeared before others as a scholar dressed in green, remained calm as he replied, "If I didn't deactivate the capital's formation, would you believe me if I told you that my fate would be far more miserable? Not only that, but some of those standing in front of White Jade capital would have inevitably been killed. The situation would have been far worse than the current one, where at least no one has died." Cui Chan chuckled coldly and continued, "I know that the value of Song Jisun's existence has already been lost. He's no longer useful like he was before. After all, there's already no need for your other son and my good disciple to become the pagoda master of White Jade capital, a perilous task where he might perish along with the swords. So, you're probably wishing that this lad could die and reincarnate as soon as possible." There was a beautiful smile on the woman's face, and she replied in a composed voice, "Imperial Preceptor, why are you uttering such nonsense?" Cui Chan didn't attempt to argue this point any further, and he said, "Following Mr. Lu's suggestion, we were initially going to use the capital's talismanic sword as the 13th flying sword of White Jade capital. This is talisman, the sword that's renowned throughout the continent and that no one can unsheathe. However, Luan Juzi felt that this was inappropriate, in the sense that this sword wouldn't be powerful enough to become the representative of the 13th floor. Moreover, we needed to sacrifice two divine weapons to split the gigantic dragon-slaying platform in Dragon Spring County, or as it was previously known, Jewel Small World. The Imperial Treasure Chamber was genuinely at low levels, and coincidentally, Talisman was renowned as the toughest sword on the continent. So, if we were lucky, it would have been able to deliver 3 strikes when wielded by a sword immortal." The woman frowned and asked, "Cui Chan, what are you trying to say?" Cui Chan ignored her and continued, "However, the dragon-slaying platform was unexpectedly too large. After just 2 strikes, cracks resembling the cracked patterns on the pottery from the dragon kills in the small town spread across the blade of the sword. The internal sword essence was shattered. In other words, it was impossible to repair the sword. The emperor was pained by this, but he didn't assign blame to anyone. Instead, he decided to gift the sword to a woman named Donghua, who's none other than Her Majesty's maidservant. At the same time, however, he also issued a decree to assign her as the river god of the Iron Talisman River. As a result, Her Majesty has lost one of her most loyal and capable assistants. Am I correct?" The woman smiled and replied, "Are you trying to say that the emperor is giving me a warning?" "Sure enough, Her Majesty is as beautiful and intelligent as always," Cui Chan said sarcastically. The woman replied with a cold chuckle. Cui Chan clicked his tongue and said, "Why don't you contemplate the fate of the formal gods of the 5 mountains?" The color instantly drained from the woman's pale and delicate face. She fell into deep thought, and it was as if she were a Go player reviewing a finished game. Cui Chan didn't interrupt her. Seizing the opportunity when Jewel Small World fell to the ground, the emperor had initially wanted to break the rules and elevate Cloud Drape Mountain, a mountain that was flowing with fortune, to the Greatly Empire's northern mountain. The awkward and peculiar thing was, the current 5 mountains of the Greatly Empire were all located to the north of Cloud Drape Mountain. Even though none of the formal gods of the 5 mountains had objected to this at the time, the statuses of these mountain gods and river gods were like a halfway point between cultivators in immortal sects and those in the cultivation world. It was as if tumultuous undercurrents had surged into the strategic pass of the empire in a single night. Cultivators from many sects and abodes had disguised themselves as devotees, ordinary people, or scholars as they visited the 5 mountains. They hadn't discussed matters pertaining to offerings and incense, and they had instead talked about the natural wonders and scenery. Meanwhile, the lower-ranked mountain gods and river gods in the surroundings had all fallen silent as if in tacit understanding. For some reason, however, the emperor, who was extremely autocratic when it came to some important matters, suddenly changed his mind. He abandoned his initial decision, which would have had great implications for the lifespan and fortune of the empire. Coincidentally, an outsider who dared to kill two grandmasters of the Great Li Empire appeared at the same time. With the emperor's resolute nature, what followed afterward was a large-scale hunt that was great in both strength and impetus. The reason for this was simple. This was a battle that would influence the momentum of the Great Li Empire's march down south. It was a battle that would decide how many casualties the Great Li Empire suffered in their expedition to conquer the south. Otherwise, with the Great Li Empire's reputation as northern barbarians in eastern treasured vile continent, it was inevitable that many powerful and conceited gods and immortals would attempt to obstruct the iron hooves that charged toward the south. These mighty beings would definitely stand in their way to test the speed and power of their blades, as well as the power of their armored cavalry. They would probe whether the Great Li Empire genuinely had the right to stand on equal footing with them. The Great Li Empire naturally had its own immortal sects as well, with many of them being officially subordinate to the imperial Song clan. This was further the case unofficially. However, this still wouldn't dissuade those cultivators who were like moths to a flame. The most terrifying people would be those tough and elusive chi refiners who specifically targeted the normal soldiers of the Great Li Empire to massacre. They would hammer one to death here and slash one to death there. Not only that, but they would also resolutely retreat immediately after killing their targets. That being the case, how could the Great Li Empire deal with them? And thus, White Jade Capital was born, slowly rising from the ground. The first people to learn about this huge secret were the 12 mountain and river gods, members of the Great Li Empire that resided outside the capital. The Golden Clouds Mountain had initially wanted to assign Cloud Drape Mountain as the northern mountain of the empire, and rescind the titles of the previous 5 mountains. Even though the emperor had subtly notified the formal gods about this, even giving each of them a clear promise, there was indeed still room for suspicion that he would kick them to the curb once they outlived their usefulness. Thus, it was somewhat understandable that the 5 formal gods had remained silent. After all, this was a decision that would impact their godly body and Tao foundations. Who dared to naively accept spoken or written offers? However, stepping forward to block and kill an enemy was completely different. This was something that aligned with the righteous direction of the empire, so there was no reason for the 12 gods who shared both honor and humiliation with the empire to prevaricate. Before exchanging blows with that saber-wielding outsider, these were indeed facts that couldn't be flawed. In fact, even the true bodies of the 6 gods who had suffered severe damage to their Tao manifestations most likely hadn't noticed any issues with this reasoning. This was especially the case since the Emperor's secret decree had clearly stated that they were only targeting a 10th tier cultivator, or perhaps an 11th tier cultivator. Even after the matter, they still felt the same way. This was the case even though they had suffered a resounding defeat. From the Emperor himself to the creator of White Jade Capital, and then to the 6 formal gods of the mountains and rivers, it appeared as if all of them had ended up as losers. However, this was because not a single one of them had anticipated that their opponent would be so powerful. When they eventually revealed this truth to the world, the Great Li Empire might even unintentionally experience glory, even though they had been defeated. Even so, Cui Chan still felt a sense of lingering apprehension as he stood atop the city wall. This was because the emperor managed to achieve some parts of his goal despite suffering defeat. Among the formal gods of the 5 mountains, only the god of the central mountain who was forever loyal to the Great Li Empire, and the god of the northern mountain who had been in the worst situation before had managed to keep their Tao manifestations unharmed. The Tao manifestations of the 3 other formal gods had all been wiped out, causing their cultivation base to fall drastically. In fact, they had almost fallen to the level of ordinary mountain gods. Becoming as feeble as they were now, they lost the power and confidence to challenge the emperor when it came to the matter of reassigning the 5 mountains. However, this wasn't the most terrifying part. In the past, the emperor had asked Cui Chan a question, while they were enjoying a hearty conversation. The imperial preceptor had thus mentioned some of his knowledge gained from experience, saying that rulers could sometimes consider those who had made mistakes or faced punishment in the past when deciding on which official to use. In fact, rulers could even consider putting these people into important positions. This was because they had been punished and taught a lesson before, so with this memory in mind, they would be especially obedient. If one day the formal gods of the 5 mountains, excluding the formal god of the central mountain, realized the hidden undercurrents of this miserable defeat, they would most likely develop a feeling of resentment toward the emperor of the Great Li Empire. However, the previous formal god of the Northern Mountain who had suffered punishment for supporting the wrong side before would only feel a sense of increasing terror to the intersection of Dragon Whisker Creek and the Iron Talisman River was a magnificent waterfall. However, Dragon Whisker Creek had now been renamed the Dragon Whisker River. In the dark of night, a seductive beauty held a sword with a golden tassel in her arms as she stood at the intersection of the creek and the river. The young woman was extremely shapely, and the fabric surrounding her chest was pushed far and tight. It could be said that she couldn't see her own toes if she looked down. Right now, many strands of the golden tassel were resting above her voluptuous chest. She was none other than the personal maidservant of Her Majesty. Even though she was extremely beautiful, she had a name that was both crude and basic, Donghua. The young woman first tossed the incredibly valuable sword of Eastern treasured Vile Continent, Talisman, into the river with a sudden thrust. She then took a deep breath before undressing herself, layer by layer. She casually tossed her clothes into the splashing Iron Talisman River. In the end, her smooth and curvaceous body was completely exposed. Bathing in the soft glow of moonlight and the rising mist from the water, she appeared increasingly ethereal and elegant. She took a step forward, and her slender body plunged straight down into the river. She was going to enter the river to become a goddess. The young woman had already received an edict from the imperial court, and tonight, she was going to become the formal goddess of the Iron Talisman River. The Great Li Empire had 3 levels of counties, large, medium, and small. Rivers were the same. Beneath the level of rivers was creeks, where the lowest level of waterway deities would reside. Even if one was appointed as the deity of a waterway, one would only obtain the title of River Guardian and not River God. Above the level of creeks was rivers, which were then separated into 3 levels again, upper, medium, and lower. After rising 2 levels, the Dragon Whisker Creek had now risen from the level of creek to medium-level river. Above the level of river was Great River, and there was no further distinction apart from this. Right now, the Iron Talisman River had risen from the level of river to Great River. However, a decision had been made to not construct any river god shrines or erect any golden river god statues for the intersecting Dragon Whisker River and Iron Talisman River. At least not at the moment. They would keep things simple wherever they could. The 2 newly appointed river gods were both unfamiliar names to those in Dragon Spring County. Among them, the Iron Talisman River's formal god was called Donghua. Compared to the loud thunder and small raindrops, of appointing the new river gods, the imperial court of the Great Li Empire also appointed 3 new formal mountain gods in a single breath. These formal gods would reside in Cloud Drape Mountain, Incense Mountain, and Downtrodden Mountain. The apotheosis ceremony was grand and majestic, and the emperor of the Great Li Empire personally penned the imperial edicts. The sage, Ruanqiong, helped announce the opening of the altar, and the assistant minister from the Ministry of Rites helped announce the contents of the imperial edict. Meanwhile, the geomantic official from the Ministry of Astronomy, and Wu Yuan, the county magistrate and parent official of Dragon Spring County, unveiled the clay golden statues of 2 of the formal gods. There was a whole sequence of elaborate formalities, and not a single formality was ignored or glossed over. The mountain gods in Eastern Treasured Vile Continent were divided into 3 levels: the formal gods of the 5 mountains, ordinary mountain gods, and mountain lords. The mountain lords that the commoners often referred to as lords of the land could be viewed as something similar to officials in waiting in the imperial courts. Generally speaking, mountains and mountain ranges would remain similar in size no matter how many hundreds or thousands of years passed. Thus, it was extremely difficult for mountain lords or mountain gods to gain promotion if they stayed in the same place. However, this wasn't definitive. If a powerful cultivator decided to reside in their mountains and cultivate, and if this cultivator eventually became someone highly regarded by an empire, such as a mighty imperial preceptor or true lord, then it would be possible for the mountain lords or mountain gods to ride their coattails and also gain promotion. After all, mountains were renowned not for their height, but for the presence of immortals living in them. Among the newly appointed mountain gods, the mountain god appointed to Downtrodden Mountain was especially strange. Only his surname Song was known. Moreover, compared to the clay statues of the 2 other mountain gods that were simply gilded in gold, The entire head of his statue had been specially forged from gold. Apart from this, however, the rest of his statue wasn't gilded in gold powder. Instead, his clothes and ornaments were simply painted using a variety of different colors. It was rumored that this was done due to a secret order from the imperial court. The river was murky, and above it was a violent and thundering waterfall. The toes of the young woman lightly touched down on the precious talismanic sword from the Taoist sect. Like vines in the water, the golden tassel of the sword had already lightly wrapped around her toes at some time. She was being punished because of her achievements. Her eyes were tightly shut, and her lashes trembled slightly as tears slowly flowed from her eyes. However, these tears were quickly swept away by the currents of the river. Even though she had been born with a unique physique that allowed her to have a strong affinity with water and rivers ever since a young age, a traveling Taoist priest had once visited her home and divined her 8 characters for her when she was young. For the Taoist priest had concluded that she was prone to attracting all kinds of dark and dirty matter in the water, so it was best that she didn't approach any water sources alone, especially places where sourceless water converged. As Donghua grew older, it wasn't long before a geomantic official from the Great Li Empire noticed her and brought her before Her Majesty. From then onward, she started to cultivate a top-notch water element technique. Her cultivation advanced in leaps and bounds, and her progress in 3 years was equivalent to the progress of others in 30 years or even longer. This was taking into account the fact that she was only cultivating casually, while the latter people were cultivating in earnest. However, this wasn't the main reason why she had been forced onto this path with no return. One had to realize that becoming river guardians or river deities was widely viewed as taking a severed path by orthodox qi refiners. This wasn't a means to achieving immortality. If a bridge to immortality were clearly collapsed in the middle, preventing one from reaching the other end, could it still be considered a bridge to immortality? Donghua understood why she had suffered this fate. She was being punished because of her achievements. This was because she had won the acknowledgement of that talismanic sword in the capital. She had successfully gained control of the sword, talisman, before the young swordsman from Wind Lightning Field, Lu Baqiao. After obtaining this supreme fated opportunity, her cultivation started to advance at an even more explosive speed. However, just as she thought that she was about to reach the upper 5 tiers, a nightmare also crept up on her silently and without warning. Firstly, it was Her Majesty telling her to offer up the talismanic sword and hand it over to Ruan Qiong, the sage overlooking Jewel's small world. After being used to strike the dragon-slaying platform twice, what was returned to her was a talismanic sword that was already teetering on the brink of shattering. However, what could she do? On one side was Her Majesty, who had given her a new lease on life, and on the other side was a sage from the School of Military Thought who was an esteemed guest of the Great Li Empire. She had no option but to grit her teeth and accept this fate. However, she truly hadn't imagined that the Emperor would suddenly issue that decree and order her to become the river goddess of the Iron Talisman River. The young woman stood atop the sword and motionlessly hovered in the river. It was as if she were a deity standing in a shrine. She rid her mind of all distracting thoughts and started to compose herself and focus her mind. She formed seals with her hands, and her body remained as immovable as a mountain. One strand after another, her hair started to slowly detach from her scalp and vanish with the current of the river. Immediately afterward, her flesh started to slowly melt and disintegrate. She was in severe pain, not only in a physical sense, but even more from the anguished wails that came from the depths of her soul. She had already channeled an untaught secret technique of the Great Li Empire to cut off her senses. Yet her slender body that was bloodied and disintegrating still couldn't help but shake. Little flesh remained on her body, and she was now almost as thin as a skeleton. In the end, the young woman was genuinely reduced to nothing more than a skeleton. The surface of the river boiled, and steam rose into the air. Resting on the bottom of the river, the talismanic sword that was almost shattered remained unmoving the entire time. However, the harrowing white skeleton that still barely resembled the shape of a young woman started to sway like flowing aquatic grass. It appeared weak and brittle, and it was as if it might be swept away by the currents of the river at any moment. It was at this critical moment that the threads on the golden tassel of the talismanic sword started to emit a golden glow. Not only did these threads tighten their grip around the young woman's toes, but they even started to slowly rise and wrap around her lower legs, eventually stopping when they reached her bone-white kneecap. Only at this moment was the skeleton finally able to stabilize itself. With the help of the golden tassel, she would no longer be disdained and abandoned by the mystical divine sense hidden in the river, and she would no longer suffer the fate of being reduced to the lowliest water-dwelling ghost or entity. Gathering divine nature, remolding a godly body, and having one's mortal body transcend to the level of pseudo-sage. Observing the skeleton, one could see the first strand of hair starting to regrow on the skull. This wasn't long crow-blue hair like that of the old woman river guardian in Dragon Whisker Creek. Instead, strands of pale golden hair started to appear on her white skull one after another, becoming increasingly lush and eventually granting her a head of long and gorgeous hair that measured several meters in length. This was a rare once-in-a-century, rain goddess form. Regardless of their rank, river guardians and river gods were ultimately bound to the land and the water. They could only go with the flow. Meanwhile, rain gods that were almost completely extinct in Eastern Treasured Vile Continent could be regarded as heavenly deities that weren't bound by the earth. Even though the rank of rain gods wouldn't be much higher than the rank of great river gods, the gap between them would be like the disparity between the strength of ordinary chi refiners and swordsmen at the same cultivation base. It was actually quite significant. Another example would be the position of palace minister, held by the lantern-bearing old man. Compared to other official positions at the same level, the importance and influence of palace ministers were far greater in all aspects. The Zenith Heaven Golden Immortal of the Tao sect, the Golden Dharmapala Arhats of the Buddhist sect, the gold-gilded clay statues of the deities, and the golden branches and jade leaves of the mortal empires, all of these titles included the description golden. Of course, it was slightly misleading when people referred to the Tao manifestations of deities as golden Tao manifestations. This didn't mean that the bodies of these deities were genuinely covered in gold or made up of gold. For example, the river guardian of the Dragon Whisker River had only developed a speck of golden light in her eyes. There was a huge gulf between her and Donghua, whose flowing golden hair signified her aptitude as a rain goddess. The young woman started to recover her appearance. Flesh grew on her bones. When she finally opened her eyes again, she was already in a body more beautiful than before. A green dress formed from the water essence of the river wrapped around her slender and enchanting body. She slowly drifted forward, and it was as if she were traversing flat ground. Her breathing was calm and relaxed, and compared to cultivating in a cave abode that was brimming with spiritual energy, she felt even more fulfilled and content at this moment. Donghua raised her hand and made a grabbing motion, and the talismanic sword that had remained sheathed the entire time drifted up from the bottom of the river and into her hand. Holding the sword horizontally in front of her, Donghua lightly pulled it out of its scabbard. She gazed at the startling fractures on the blade. They were like scars on the face of a beautiful woman, and this was something that would cause one to feel sorrow and pity. Now a great river goddess of the Greatly Empire, Donghua turned the edge of the talismanic sword upward and gazed down at the blade that was still just as sharp as before. Her voice was gentle as she murmured, "In the end, only you haven't left or abandoned me." The talismanic sword shuddered slightly. Its spiritual energy was exhausted, and it was much like a haggard old person lying on their deathbed. It was completely devoid of spirit and energy. "I won't ever view you with disdain, so be it if this is a severed path. We'll walk to the end together." Donghua lowered her head and slightly tilted her face. Using the edge of the talismanic sword, she drew a deep gash into her cheek, so deep that even her cheekbone became visible. The surging water of the Iron Talisman River roared by, becoming increasingly vigorous and gallant. It was filled with killing intent, and there was not a hint of resentment or melancholy. Such was the case with worldly matters. Trouble would befall those who possessed cherished items, and punishment would befall those whose talent drew envy. Such was the case with worldly beings, coming into possession of deadly blades. Killing intent would naturally possess their hearts. The embroidered flower river was extremely elegant and beautiful. Gentle waves rippled across the green surface of the water, and the river was wide yet gave off a warm feeling at the same time. The southbound ship that Chan Ping'an and the others were on consisted of 2 levels, with most of the passengers being scholars in Azure or merchants and travelers. Li Baoping wasn't afraid of unfamiliar people. and she enjoyed walking into crowded areas with her small bookcase on her back. She would prick up her ears and listen to their conversations. When the scholars saw that it was an energetic but well-behaved little girl standing at a comfortable distance and carrying a small green bookcase, which signified that she was on a journey for knowledge, they would often smile kindly and not pay too much heed to her. They would continue their conversations without a worry in their minds. Li Huai carefully manipulated the donkey leash, as he rode it in circles around a small area at the bow of the ship. He appeared much like a domineering general inspecting the borders of his nation. Strangely enough, the white donkey only allowed Li Huai to ride it. This caused Li Huai to feel immense happiness. As for returning this donkey to Wei Jin from the Divine Platform branch of Wind Snow Temple, and regarding asking him for generous compensation, Li Huai had naturally forgotten about these important matters and treated them as nothing more than wind passing by his ears. Lin Shuyi walked up to Chan Ping'an and sat down with his back against the rail of the ship. He hesitated briefly before asking, "Aren't you curious about why Aoyang called me a qi refiner? And about how I became a qi refiner?" Chan Ping'an paused his motions of slicing the green bamboo with his machete, and he replied with a smile, "Of course I'm curious. However, I felt like it wouldn't be right to ask. I was afraid that you would overthink things." Lin Shuyi felt slightly dejected. Among the 3 disciples from the private school, even a blind person could tell that Chan Ping'an only truly cared for one of them, Li Baoping. Between him and Li Huai, Chan Ping'an most likely had a better relationship with the latter. Lin Shuyi wasn't sure whether this was because both Chan Ping'an and Li Huai had grown up in impoverished alleys in the small town, or whether it was because he was too taciturn and reserved. In any case, the young boy didn't care much about these trivial matters either. However, Lin Shuyi still couldn't help but feel a little gloomy. "Do you know about the impressive power of the small gourd or not?" he asked. Chan Ping'an quietly observed the surroundings before nodding and replying in a low voice. Even Aoyang said that it was a rare sword nurturing gourd or whatnot, so of course it's extremely precious and rare. "Then do you know how great an opportunity you lost when you turned down the offer to drink from it, when you were practicing your fist technique?" Lin Shuyi asked. "It was because I continued to drink wine from the small gourd that I was able to officially set foot on the path of cultivation and become a qi refiner. Or in the eyes of ordinary people, become an immortal who cultivates in the mountains. When we first embarked on this journey, I was the person who struggled the most to keep up. After drinking that wine, however, I could sense that my body had transformed completely. Whether that be my bones or tendons, my vision or hearing, or my stamina or strength. After a while, I was even able to keep up with you. Did you not realize this?" Chan Ping'an subconsciously rubbed the cool green bamboo strips with his fingers and replied, "In fact, you were already traversing the mountain paths with ease when we left the banks of the Iron Talisman River and approached Go Table Mountain." Lin Shui's expression didn't change and he calmly replied, "Oh, so you already knew." Aoyang was a very lazy person. "He's extremely capable, but he's not willing to take care of trivial matters," Chan Ping'an explained with a smile. "As the person leading the group, I naturally had to be mindful of each person's stamina and limits. I needed to understand when to stop and take a rest. By doing this, you guys could improve your stamina without feeling too tired. The journey ahead of us is still long, so I hope you guys won't need to face too many hardships and struggles in the future." Lin Shuyi suddenly crossed his arms and humped coldly as he looked at Chan Ping'an's expression. "I wouldn't believe these words if they were spoken by anyone else." Chan Ping'an waved the bamboo strip in his hand and asked with a smile, "I'm becoming more and more skilled at this. However, the last bookcase I make will definitely be the best looking one. So I'll give this one to Li Huai first? If that's the case, then I'll make this one a little bit smaller." Lin Shuyi shot a glance at the little boy who was riding the old donkey before shaking his head and saying, "Forget about it. Make my bookcase first. At worst, I'll just have to listen to some of his grumblings. Then I'll use some more rope and try to make it as sturdy as I can." Chan Ping'an chuckled. "You're a powerful immortal after all, so if you end up flying around like Aoyang in the future, the bookcase will break in no time if I don't make it sturdier." Lin Shuyi heaved a sigh. He didn't feel like he was stupid, but it was truly difficult for him to keep up with Chan Ping'an's thoughts. He suddenly recalled something that had bugged him for a long time, and he asked in curiosity, "Back when we were staying at Pillow Relay Station, Why did you reveal the truth about Zhuhou and Zhu Lu's departure to Li Baoping not long after Aoyang left? Chen Ping'an's expression became serious and he countered. Do you think I have a better relationship with Li Baoping? Or with that father and daughter? Nonsense, Lin Shuyi snapped in reply. Chen Ping'an nodded and explained. And that's why I had to explain the situation to Li Baoping. She needed to understand what these people from her clan had done. I have a fairly good understanding of what kind of person Zhu Lu is. When Aoyang purposely laid a trap for her at that time, she wasn't simply wavering due to hesitation. Instead, she hoped that her father Zhuhou could step forward again. Back in Go Table Mountain, it was because of her actions that we were dragged into a perilous situation. However, since we all pulled through unscathed, I could forgive her by thinking that she was simply flustered because she was anxious to save her father. If I were in her position, I wouldn't have necessarily done any better. Thus, even though I was angry, I didn't say anything to scold her or blame her. However, her actions at Pillow Relay Station were simply unforgivable. To say nothing of her young mistress Li Baoping, I feel like Zhu Lu would be willing to betray anyone as long as the price is right. There was a tinge of sadness in Chen Ping'an's voice as he continued. If she doesn't change, then there'll eventually come a day when her actions will cause her father to die. After leaving Red Candle Town alive, I don't want to see a decent person like Zhuhou die at the hands of his own daughter. She can still enjoy the company of her father. So why doesn't she understand to cherish this? Do you really think that all parents in the world are good parents? Lin Shuyi asked with a cold expression. I don't care about the others. My parents were extremely good parents, Chen Ping'an said firmly. Lin Shuyi's expression was slightly dark. However, what Chen Ping'an said next caused his expression to lighten a little. Zhuhou is a good person, but it seems like he doesn't really know how to discipline his daughter. Since some of her actions are clearly wrong, why doesn't he say anything and try to educate her? I don't understand this. Lin Shuyi, you're a smart person, so do you know why this is? Lin Shuyi appeared slightly worn out and he replied, perhaps this is a blind spot for him. However, the simple concept of parental love isn't something that can be applied to every parent in the world. Chen Ping'an, every family has its own hardships. Your parents passed away early, and it's because of this that you don't need to worry about some of these matters. Of course, I'm not trying to imply anything else. If this sounds grating on the ear, then just ignore what I said. Chen Ping'an waved a hand and said with a smile, no, it's all good. Lin Shuyi glanced at Chen Ping'an's hair and said, your hairpin vanished just like that, and you're not going to look for it? Chen Ping'an continued to busy himself with the strips of bamboo. He shook his head and replied, it can't be found. Being as miserly as I am, do you really think I'd be careless enough to lose such a precious belonging? Lin Shuyi's expression became strange and he remarked, no wonder Aoyang said that I should swap names with you. There's some deeper meaning behind this? Chen Ping'an asked in curiosity. However, Lin Shuyi had already changed the topic. He leaned forward slightly and said to the expert craftsman Chen Ping'an, can you add a bit of a curve to this part of the bookcase? Otherwise it will look too straight and boring. It's better if the bookcase has a good balance of straight edges and curves. That way, it will also look better from a distance. Chen Ping'an nodded and said, I'll try my best. However, I won't take any responsibility if it comes out looking bad. Knowing that Chen Ping'an was someone who always stayed true to his word, Lin Shuyi, who had high expectations for his bookcase, couldn't help but feel anxious. No, that certainly won't do, he hurriedly said. These stalks of bamboo from Go Table Mountain are extremely precious and rare, and one stalk used is one stalk gone. My bookcase needs to be pleasing to the eye, and at the same time it also needs to be functional and sturdy. Chen Ping'an, you can slow down a bit when you cut the bamboo with your machete. When you're making the frame, you can also stop and give it some more thought. Yes, you definitely need to give it some more thought. However, Chen Ping'an's movements remained quick as he continued to cut the bamboo with his machete. Bamboo scraps and offcuts continued to fall to the floor. Chen Ping'an then picked these up and placed them into his basket. Lin Shuyi was horrified by what he saw. Seeing the aloof young boy's worried expression from the corners of his eyes, Chen Ping'an suppressed his laughter and said, how about I make your bookcase last? My name is Lin Shuyi, so how can I go back on my words? One? The young boy replied with an angry expression. Chen Ping'an suddenly understood why Aoyang liked to tease others so much. This was a fairly good feeling. With the donkey following behind him, Li Huai swaggered over to them and asked openly, Chen Ping'an, do you think Aoyang will return tomorrow? Have you forgotten? Chen Ping'an looked up and asked. Li Huai hurriedly covered his mouth with his hands. After a while, he put his hands down and thievishly glanced at the surroundings. Only then did he let go of the donkey leash and squat down opposite Chen Ping'an. He lowered his voice and said, Then the day after tomorrow. That will also be fine. Anyway, I'll only wait until the day we disembark from the ship. If Aoyang still hasn't returned by that time, then I won't view him as a friend anymore. Chen Ping'an, tell me, am I already being very generous? I am, right? When Aoyang falls to his knees and begs me for forgiveness at that time, you can say a few words for him, and I'll reluctantly agree to become friends with him again. Lin Shui decided to shut his eyes and completely ignore his classmate. This was one of the best ways to deal with Li Huai. Lin Shui had never seen such a punchable person before. In fact, he was genuinely curious about whether he would take pleasure in Li Huai's misfortune if calamity did one day befall him. There was the bray of a donkey, followed by the sound of a small child falling to the deck and bawling. Li Huai looked over with a slightly baffled expression. The white donkey had gotten itself into some trouble. The small child had most likely run over to tease the donkey for fun, but the white donkey was extremely short-tempered and wasn't having a bar of it. Even though it wouldn't attack people, it could definitely frighten a small child who dared to mess around with it. In fact, it was doing so right now, raising its front hooves and forcefully stomping them into the deck again and again. The small child was so terrified that he didn't even dare to cry anymore. Chen Ping'an immediately put his machete and the bamboo strips down before briskly walking over. He carefully helped the small child up before turning to the white donkey and gesturing for it to calm down. Even though the donkey was still a little restless, it did indeed cease its stomping after seeing Chen Ping'an's gestures. It quietly stood where it was. The small child was dressed in satin, and he wildly swung his arms as he attempted to break free from Chen Ping'an's helping hands. When he saw his elders rushing over from the second level of the ship, he instantly started to wail and scream again. A solidly built man in black quickly strode over, with one step enough to cover 3 ordinary steps. He arrived beside the small child in a flash, and he squatted down and asked quietly, What's wrong, young master you? Chen Ping'an waved at Li Huai, who was attempting to sneakily scurry away. Li Huai shrunk back in fear, but when he caught Chen Ping'an's gaze, he finally didn't dare to run away anymore. He walked next to Chen Ping'an and hung his head in anxiousness. My little white donkey definitely wouldn't bite people for no reason. I'm not lying to you, Chen Ping'an, he said meekly. However, you still have to apologize to them, Chen Ping'an said softly. Li Huai looked up and complained in an upset voice. But why? It was that child who provoked my little white donkey first. My donkey didn't hurt him either, so why do I have to apologize to him? It should be that immature child who apologizes to me. Chen Ping'an was just about to explain this to Li Huai. However, Li Baoping had already run back from somewhere in the distance and stood next to Chen Ping'an. Meanwhile, Lin Shui had also stood up. However, he needed to stay put to keep an eye on their belongings. Someone standing behind the small child roared in an angry and dignified voice. What an impudent beast! You actually dare to wound people! This was a middle-aged man who was radiating with the mighty aura of an official. His expression was grim, and he swept his gaze across Chen Ping'an and the others. Where are your guardians? Tell them to get out here. Chen Ping'an's expression was calm, and he said quietly, Li Huai. Already half hidden behind Chen Ping'an, Li Huai timidly said, It was my fault for not keeping an eye on my little white donkey. Sorry for scaring your child. After mustering his courage to apologize to these strangers, Li Huai immediately started to choke up. Aoyang had once teased him and called him a chicken who only dared to act aggressively at home, but could only act meekly once he went out. His observations were indeed keen and correct. Chen Ping'an patted Li Huai's head before turning to the middle-aged man and asking, Is there anything else we can do for you? The middle-aged man sneered and said, Such big words from a small child. Tell your parents or guardians to come over and speak. A graceful-looking woman had a distressed expression as she picked up the small child. As she listened to the child in her arms explaining the situation, the frown on her face grew deeper and deeper. This was especially the case when she heard her child recounting the violent behavior of the donkey, crashing around and biting everyone it came across. If he hadn't fled quickly enough, his arm would have definitely been bitten off by that fierce and unruly beast. The woman shook in fury and she yelled, "Aren't you going to do anything about this? You were given the cold shoulder in the capital for so many years, yet you're still going to allow a beast to harass your son after going to such great pains to move somewhere else? Even if you don't feel ashamed, I, a woman, feel ashamed for you." Chen Ping'an took a deep breath before saying to the gloomy-faced middle-aged man, "Our guardians aren't accompanying us, so I'm the one in charge of everything." The woman's gaze shifted sideways and she coldly glared at Chen Ping'an and the others as she taunted, "They can't even manage a four-legged beast properly, so how can these two-legged things be any better? Bunch of motherless filth." Li Baoping trembled in anger, and her face was bright red as she retorted, "Little white donkey is super obedient. We'll apologize if we did anything wrong. But you can't slander us for things that we didn't do. If you're so capable, then why don't you question that child again? You can throw accusations after you've made heads or tails of the situation." Lin Shui's expression was dark and sinister as he raised his arm toward his chest. The stack of yellow paper talismans was wide-ranging and level, and with Lin Shui's novice cultivation base and physique, he could only manipulate the 3 lowest-level talismans. Chen Ping'an shot a quick glance at Lin Shui, subtly questioning him about the situation. Lin Shui nodded in reply, signaling that the Yin god wasn't far away from here. He had already initiated contact with him, and the Yin god could appear at any time. Chen Ping'an retracted his gaze and said to the middle-aged man with a solemn expression, "I hope that lady can apologize to us." After the huge commotion, the owner of the ship, who was snobbish to the poor and obsequious to the rich, immediately ran over and offered these esteemed guests a top-quality private room on the 2nd level. He told them it would be fine even if they wanted to bring the donkey inside. It was his humble ship that was honored by their presence. Many other passengers visited them after hearing of their exploits, and most of them were wearing a saber instead of a sword by their waist. It was clear that they wanted to cotton up to Chen Ping'an and the others. Chen Ping'an wasn't familiar with this kind of thing, so it was Lin Shui who stepped forward to help them politely decline these requests to visit. Lin Shui had grown up in an official residence, after all, so his actions and manner of speech were naturally elegant and refined. Even though he was declining them, the visitors still left with happy smiles on their faces. The swordsman, who the old man had referred to as Baijing, was a relatively renowned lone cultivator in the southern regions of the Great Li Empire. His sword, Spirit Void, was a legitimate artifact, and it was an impressive weapon from the talisman branch of the Taoist sect. According to legends, a mighty figure had once left the mountains to cultivate his mind. After passing and being hacked apart by sabers in the wilderness, this sword was a relic that he had left. Afterward, the swordsman in white had come across it by chance. Relying on his already impressive sword skills, the swordsman had eventually comprehended the true meaning of the sword. It was from that moment that he started to gain renown. However, he didn't like being restrained, and it was because of this that he hadn't accepted the invitations from the governments and armies of the Great Li Empire. Instead, he liked to travel around the world. To have his name remembered in a region where beasts lay hidden and powerful cultivators were abundant, this white-robed swordsman was indeed a very impressive person. However, he had been toyed with and defeated before he could even draw his sword from its scabbard. He had suffered a humiliating defeat. Perhaps this was a defeat that would even cast shadows on his sword heart and leave contamination in his sword intent. After considering this, one could ponder just how much power Chen Ping'an and the others could wield. There were many knowledgeable scholars, experienced merchants, and adventuring cultivators on the ship, and regardless of whether they were good-intentioned or ill-willed, few of them could be regarded as fools. When he saw that there were no more visitors, Lin Shui massaged his temples in slight irritation. If it wasn't for the fact that he could personally see his emerald green bookcase slowly taking form in Chen Ping'an's hands during his brief periods of rest, perhaps the aloof and taciturn Lin Shui would have truly abandoned his politeness and vented his frustrations at the visitors. Chen Ping'an felt slightly sympathetic toward him, and he said, Don't worry. I'll definitely make a bookcase that you're satisfied with. There was exhaustion on Lin Shuyi's face as he sat down and crossed his legs. He revealed his true thoughts in a rare turn of events, saying softly, I truly want to find a tranquil place with beautiful mountains and limpid waters to cultivate in seclusion. I'll only need to worry about my years in the mountains, and I won't need to care even if hundreds or thousands of years have already passed in the outside world. However, Aoyang told me that this method of cultivating the mind is called a deserted grave mound method. This method is indeed feasible, but only for qi refiners who have already reached a certain level in cultivation. I've only just set foot on the path of cultivation, so if I try to follow this method, I'll definitely suffer qi deviation and fall to a heretical path without knowing. Chen Pingyan nodded and replied, Then you do need to be careful. Squatting beside them with his face resting in his hands, Li Huai chuckled giddily. Lin Shuyi, maybe Aoyang was just scaring you. If you ask me, I'd say that Go Table Mountain looks quite nice. It's a suitable place for you to become an immortal. When you get bored, you can even chat and muck around with that mountain Lord Weibo. You can ride the big turtles or you can ride that black python. Just how impressive will that be? However, if this is the case, it will mean that you're not coming to Great Sway Nation with us anymore. So why don't you give this bookcase to me? I might not be able to carry it now, but when I grow taller and stronger in a few years, this big bookcase will be a perfect replacement for my small bookcase. I'll remember your kindness, and I can even return the bookcase to you when we return from Great Sway Nation in the future. Lin Shuyi shot a sideways glance at the scheming Li Huai. He smiled coldly and said, I won't give my bookcase to you even if I leave and cultivate in Go Table Mountain. Oh, then you might as well stay with us and go to Great Sway Nation together, Li Huai replied. Lin Shuyi rubbed his glabella. He felt like only Aoyang could keep Li Huai under control. No, Li Baoping could as well, and so could Chen Pingyan. Hang on, was he the only one who couldn't deal with Li Huai? Lin Shuyi was in a fairly bad mood, and he kept his gaze fixed on Li Huai. The little boy's hair stood on end, and he hurriedly pledged his loyalty by saying, What's wrong, Lin Shuyi? I actually do want you to come to Great Sway Nation with us. It's just that I'm a bit envious of your bookcase. I won't deny this, but what can I do about this? Your bookcase is bigger than mine after all. However, if you genuinely decide to disembark the ship and head back to Go Table Mountain, I definitely won't be happy. Just think about it. Of the four of us, only you're sanctimonious and filled with evil schemes. If we come across bad people who don't have evil written all over their faces in the future, then only you'll be able to see through them with a single glance. Isn't that right, Chen Ping and Li Baoping? Li Huai looked around for reinforcements. Chen Pingyan's head was lowered as he continued to earnestly make the bookcase. It was as if he hadn't heard Li Huai's words at all. Meanwhile, Li Baoping's mind had wandered to someplace tens of thousands of kilometers away, as she pondered some strange and peculiar questions. She was completely absorbed in thought. Lin Shuyi's mind was heavy and he said, Do you think our journey to Great Sway Nation will be easy? Apart from the dangers and obstructions posed by the mountains and rivers, we'll definitely encounter many troubles that we can't even imagine. Li Huai blinked as he listened to this. The Great Li Empire is founded on martial arts, so the factions and forces in these lands can't be underestimated. There are few renowned scholars, and before our teacher founded Mountain Cliff Academy, the Great Li Empire was derided by everyone else in the continent as a land of barbarians. Lin Shuyi continued slowly. Li Huai nodded and said, I already know this. Mr. Qi never shied away from talking about these things. It's not like he never told us about the Great Li Empire situation before. Lin Shuyi sighed and continued, I remember the Kiln Supervision official Master Song telling me some things when I was young. Many years ago, a scholar from the Great Li Empire finally managed to pass the exam and enter Lakeview Academy after much difficulty. However, what welcomed him was a barrage of humiliation from all sides. Not only was he verbally abused, but according to Master Song, he was even subject to a scheme set up by two scholars from Great Sway Nation's Gao clan and Lu clan. The scholar from the Great Li Empire suffered a mental collapse because of this, and he became crazy for a great number of years. When he finally managed to recover, he was brutally stabbed in the heart again due to a matter pertaining to love. In the end, he jumped into a river and committed suicide. The imperial court of the Great Li Empire was enraged by this, and this was one of the sparks that ignited the full-scale war with the Lu Empire. This was a war where the Great Li Empire gambled the fortune of the entire nation. You have to realize that before this, the Great Li Empire had only been a subordinate empire to the Lu Empire. Thus, we could only suppress our anger and tolerate the harassment and obstacles thrown at us. However, the situation has already changed a lot. There are more and more scholars in the Great Li Empire now, and the qi refiners cultivating in the mountains have also started to come out and serve in the imperial court of the empire, or courageously slay enemies on the borders. This has led to a completely different scenario. The scholars in the Great Li Empire enjoy a lofty status, and once they become officials, they'll naturally feel like they're superior to everyone else. For example, the person who claimed to be the county magistrate of Wanping County just then was most likely a scholar from the capital, someone who passed the imperial examination and was deployed to a local area. Right now, I'm worried that he'll choose to target us when we disembark the ship in an area under his jurisdiction. Perhaps he'll target us because of his temperament as a scholar, or perhaps he'll target us as a new official looking to make sweeping changes. Lin Shui smiled and continued, "Fortunately, he's only a scholarly official. However, there's an immortal among us who has yet to show himself. Perhaps he'll be able to deter this official." After all, scholars are still unable to compete with qi refiners regardless of how precious they are in the Great Li Empire. The only fear is if the county magistrate isn't smart enough, or more accurately, if he doesn't understand the true might of a qi refiner. If that's the case, then we'll still be plagued by a string of troubles. Li Huai was filled with anxiety, and he turned around to slap the white donkey that was lying on its side. "Troublemaker donkey," he scolded. "Do you think you're a beautiful young lady or something? Was there any need to lose your temper after being touched a little? That old man is definitely an esteemed guest of the county magistrate now." Li Baoping suddenly interjected. "They can both pour their grievances out to each other. However, I believe that the higher the old man's status and the more skillful the swordsman's swordsmanship, the less likely the county magistrate will dare to target us openly. My eldest brother told me that scholars often fail their rebellions even after many years. As for secretly targeting us with small schemes, this isn't something that we need to be afraid of. We'll deal with whatever they throw at us, as long as they don't utilize the power of the imperial court. What are you afraid of, Lin Shui? Don't lose your composure and fall into disarray." Lin Shui pondered this carefully before nodding and saying, "This is most likely the case." After voicing her opinion, Li Baoping turned to Chen Pingyan and asked with an earnest expression, "Is that right, junior uncle? How would I know about the long-winded thought processes of these scholars and officials? In any case, you and Lin Shui can discuss the plans if we come across any trouble," Chen Pingyan replied. During the incident where Mr. Ma was killed, the group of children had not only managed to return to the small town safely, but they had even managed to trick the coach driver who had referred to himself as a spy from the Great Li Empire. In reality, it was Lin Shui who had come up with the idea and Li Baoping who had formulated the plan. Lin Shui had then double-checked the plan to ensure that there were no issues. The minds of these two children were far more mature than others at the same age. Chen Pingyan suddenly stopped his movements. After thinking for a moment, he decided to put his machete down next to his feet. If his mind wasn't calm, then Chen Pingyan wouldn't do anything. He would rather do nothing than do something wrong. This had been the case when firing pottery in the dragon kills, and this was still the case when practicing his fist technique now. Li Baoping, Li Huai, and Lin Shui all noticed this at almost the exact same moment. Even Li Huai hurriedly fixed his sitting posture. Upon seeing the slightly paranoid response from the three children, Chen Pingyan smiled bitterly and said, "What are you guys doing? It's just that there's something on my mind. There's no need for you three to be so anxious. What's wrong? Why don't you tell us, junior uncle?" Li Baoping said, "I was just thinking, in addition to learning characters from you guys, should I also learn some of the knowledge written in the books?" Chen Pingyan replied with a smile. Li Baoping faltered for a moment before saying, "But we've only learned some elementary principles from Mr. Qi. We haven't learned anything grand or lofty. Moreover, we're only children who have just started school. So how can we possibly teach junior uncle? Even Mr. Qi was unable to answer many of my questions pertaining to the phrases in the elementary text, so how can we teach them? Answering questions randomly isn't good. It wasn't that Mr. Qi couldn't answer them, it was just that you were unwilling to listen to him if he answered your questions a little too late, Li Huai mumbled. Li Baoping suddenly turned around and punched Li Huai on the head. This wasn't a painful punch, but Li Huai still wrapped his arms around his head and wailed. I can't live like this anymore. I also want to practice a fist technique. Li Baoping's becoming stronger by the day, so if I don't do something, she'll definitely kill me by accident one day. Chen Ping'an, why do you want to learn the knowledge written in the books? Lin Shui asked in curiosity. I'm afraid that I'll speak facts and reason to someone one day, but I'll realize afterward that my facts and reasons were actually incorrect, Chen Ping'an replied slowly. So, in addition to the things that Old Man Yao and Aoyang taught me, I also want to learn some of the principles written in these books for scholars. Li Huai was extremely baffled. He had a stunned expression and he exclaimed, Chen Ping'an, you're already so good at fighting, and you also work so diligently to practice your fist technique every day. Is this not so that you can be unreasonable with others? Lin Shui hesitated briefly before shaking his head and saying, Chen Ping'an, I feel like there's no need to speak reason for everything. After all, everyone in the world has their own unique path to walk. It's fine as long as we can guard our own conscience. Otherwise, we'll only be bogged down by endless matters. Sometimes, doing too much is just as bad as not doing enough. Li Baoping's expression was serious as she said, Don't worry, junior uncle. Let me think about this for a while. I feel like this is a very important matter, so it's crucial that I treat it with utmost seriousness. This was the response that Li Baoping would often receive from Mr. Qi back when she was studying in the private school in the small town. Whenever she asked some seemingly simple question, Mr. Qi would instead fall into deep thought. When this happened, it would take Mr. Qi several days to finally give her an answer. Chen Ping'an became increasingly exasperated, and he looked up at the clear blue sky. However, he retracted his gaze after a short while, and a smile suddenly appeared across his face for some unknown reason. There's actually a selfish reason for why I'm going to so much trouble. Maybe the three of you haven't experienced this before because you're not genuinely practicing the fist technique. But after obtaining that fist technique, I've always had a nagging feeling whenever I face an opponent. I'm not afraid of you guys laughing at me, but as long as I feel like my actions are reasonable, regardless of whether I can voice this reason or not, it's as if there's someone in my mind telling me that my punch can be very fast. When they heard this, it was as if the three children were all looking at an unfamiliar Chen Ping'an. The impoverished young boy from Clay Vase Alley was glowing with exuberance, and his fists were tightly clenched on his knee as he continued in confidence. Moreover, the voice in my mind tells me that my next punch can even be faster. It can definitely be faster. I can throw this punch no matter who's standing in front of me. Lin Shui had a dazed expression as he murmured softly, This can't be regarded as falling into a heretical way, right? He seems fairly righteous and awe-inspiring. In fact, he genuinely seems a bit like Mr. Qi when he described the most exquisite principles of the sages. Li Baoping was still mulling over the question from before. Meanwhile, Chen Ping'an had already grabbed his machete and started to work on the small bookcase for Lin Shui again.